Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to be talking about Season 2 of Mythic Plus in World of Warcraft, Dragonflight. Patch 10.1 is dropping in a couple of days, and Blizzard is doing their last round of Season 2 Mythic Plus testing on the PTR as I'm writing this, and things are really coming together in an awesome way. We've learned a lot about the 3 new affixes that will be added to Mythic Plus in Season 2 of Dragonflight, and they've gone through a lot of changes throughout the PTR. I'm happy to report that while things got off to a pretty shaky start, they're looking really good and well-balanced now. So anyways, here's the TLDR version. It's good. There's always a bit of challenge in learning a new affix or a new dungeon, but I think that Season 2 will be a lot easier than what we're used to with Mythic Plus, and that's great. Not only are the new affixes really good, Blizzard has made quite a few changes to some of the dungeons that they're rolling in, particularly the Underrot, which is a dungeon I wasn't excited about. That's something that I've seen a lot of people say, hey, that seems like a fun dungeon. I think they've forgotten that it had an insane level of interrupt requirements, and most of those have been nerfed. So it is actually significantly easier in the coming season than my memories of it from Battle for Azeroth, which is good. So just talking about affixes in Season 2, first off, there is no seasonal affix in Season 2 at all. It's just Fortified or Tyrannical, and then up to 2 more affixes based on the key level. That's it. Also, instead of new affixes at level 4 and level 7, they're being shifted to level 7 and level 14. Because of that, and the changes being made to affixes in the +7 bracket, players should be able to reach new heights and pushing keys. Getting 20s done early in the season will probably be a great deal easier, and just generally I think most of the new affixes are a lot less tedious than the ones they're replacing. Just in general for me, the problem I've always had with Mythic Plus, ever since it was first implemented, is that I felt like in a lot of cases I was playing the affix more than I was playing the dungeons. And that bothers me. I like the experience of dungeons. I even like dungeons being difficult. I've always enjoyed the initial Mythic 0 pushing in the opening weeks of an expansion when you're basically wearing the gear you leveled up in, and now you're trying to do content that hits fairly hard. I enjoyed Cataclysm dungeons during the first week of that expansion, which were legendarily pretty difficult. I don't mind difficult content, I just never really liked the way that the affixes felt, and thankfully this season is probably the biggest set of changes they've ever done to affixes. So with all of that being said, when you factor in the affixes and the new dungeons, I think the upcoming season is going to be the most fun season of Mythic Plus that Blizzard has ever released. Now I want to get into the blue posts, so let's just start with a quick refresher on the list of the 8 dungeons that'll be available in Season 2. Neltharis, Halls of Infusion, Brackenhide Hollow, and Uldaman Legacy of Tyr. Those are the 4 dungeons from Dragonflight that we didn't have as Mythic Plus in Season 1. And then, additionally, Freehold and Underrot from Battle for Azeroth, Neltharian's Lair from Legion, and Vortex Pinnacle from Cataclysm. Freehold is a returning fan favorite, and I'm very happy about it as well. Neltharian's Lair is my favorite dungeon from Legion, and maybe my favorite Mythic Plus ever, so that's a welcome addition for me as well. And the return of Vortex Pinnacle is super surprising. I do actually like that dungeon a lot, and the potential of bringing back Cataclysm or Wrath of the Lich King dungeons back as Mythic Plus is really compelling. They certainly would have to do like a lot of redesign to bring anything from pre-Cataclysm back, like thinking about doing some of those old dungeons is like kind of weird, but it's a pretty cool concept that they've been willing to reach this far back. The Underrot is my least favorite dungeon on this list. It's fine, and knowing that they have made some pretty significant changes to the level of interrupt requirements for that dungeon, I think makes it a lot less daunting, frustrating going into it, and I think it's going to wind up being just fine. But I wouldn't have been upset to never do it again either, especially the last boss on Tyrannical. Never that big of a fan of it. But that's okay, I think all in all, this group of dungeons is going to be pretty good. So on the subject of affixes, Blizzard is reworking 2 affixes that are in what used to be the level 7 pool. They are swapping the level 7 and level 14 pools, and they are replacing 3 affixes that used to be in the level 14 pool and now are in the level 7. Look, they're making a lot of changes. I think that's the best way to look at it. Let's start with the affixes that they're reworking. Bolstering and Raging are both being redesigned. Bolstering will no longer increase enemy health pools by 20% per stack, it just increases damage by 20% per stack, and that's it. This is just a straight nerf to the difficulty of Bolstering, and it's a really good change. One thing that I've always hated about Bolstering is how it makes pulls just drag on and on and on as mobs get more and more health, especially if somebody tries to help out by pulling extra mobs when a pull's getting near the end. Now they've just added 20% more health to all the mobs. It's just annoying. I hate how it slows down pulling, even when things are going right. It just makes trash take a lot longer, and this is a really good fix for that. Raging has been redesigned as well. Instead of permanently increasing enemy damage by 50% once they drop below 30% health, they now gain immunity to crowd controls for 20 seconds. They can still be interrupted. This was a huge issue for like the first couple of hours of testing. It were uninterruptible, which was a huge problem, but Blizzard changed that pretty quickly. Presumably they can still be de-enraged by, any sort of soothe effect. A rogue, a hunter, a druid can take care of that, an evoker. But essentially, this is a much easier to deal with affix now. These are two pretty basic nerfs in my opinion, and I think they're a really good change. Bolstering is just clearly nerfed in a way that makes it a lot less annoying, which is good. Raging could potentially be more dangerous in some situations where you really need to CC an enemy to stop a uninterruptible cast, but it should generally be a lot less dangerous in the majority of situations, so I think it's just an easier affix as well. It's definitely more interesting in terms of how you deal with it. Just adding damage is always the most boring approach to designing mechanics, at least in my opinion. In addition to those two redesigned affixes, there are 3 that are being added to the level 7 pool, and that means they have to retire 3 affixes, so let's just cover that real quick. First, Explosive, Quaking, and Grievous are all being taken away, and I love that. Notably, all of the affixes that are being added only work while you're in combat, and that was probably the thing I hated most about Quaking. It was the only affix that I can think of that would work while you're out of combat. It would interrupt you when you were rezzing or drinking or eating. It could quake while you're trying to shroud past packs of mobs. I just really never liked Quaking because of that always on aspect even when you weren't in combat. Grievous was a really boring affix. It just adds more damage whenever you take damage. It could be really tough at times. I mean, sometimes it could be the hardest affix, but it wasn't interesting in any situation. Explosive was a really annoying affix in a lot of situations as well. When I started writing this video script, it was Explosive Week, and man, oh man, it was just so irritating that week. I really felt like I was playing the affix far more than I was playing the dungeon. It adds so many orbs that you have to deal with, and that's kind of a huge waste of damage to throw so many GCDs into explosive orbs that have like 1400 health. They tried playing around with the idea of giving them a bunch more health and reducing the spawn rate. It never really worked out very well. They soaked up so much more damage, and I think the only solution to explosive is to remove it, which is a good call. I will not miss that affix at all. Now let's get into the 3 new affixes that are replacing them, and I think they're pretty good. First new affix is Incorporeal. While you're in combat, incorporeal beings appear and attempt to destabilize players with spells that reduce their damage and healing done. Incorporeal beings are susceptible to all forms of crowd control. Sorta. I think it's a pretty good affix. It summons 1 to 2 NPCs at a time, and you need to CC or interrupt them to prevent their cast from going off. They have a pretty slow cast, it's about 5 seconds, and it applies a party-wide debuff that reduces damage and healing by 50%. It lasts for 10 seconds, and it stacks, so if you let them get 2 casts off, no one will be able to do damage or heal for 10 whole seconds. That's basically a death sentence. One issue I have with these guys is that they aren't CCable by AoEs. Despite their descriptions saying that they're vulnerable to all forms of crowd control and the extremely high penalty for missing interrupts on them, so paralysis, polymorph, hammer of justice, single target, stuns, and other kinds of crowd control will work on them, but leg sweep, psychic scream, shockwave, that sort of AoE CC does not. I think that's probably something that either should be changed or maybe their damage and healing penalty should be reduced a bit to compensate. They last for 20 seconds at a time, and that can make them pretty disruptive if you're in the middle of a difficult pull. I think this is probably the most difficult of the 3 affixes. It's certainly the one that's the most notable to me, and the one that favors some classes more than others. At least, the most. I think they all favor one class in particular, which I'll get to in a little bit, but this one is the most extreme example of that. It's not all bad, though. If you leave combat, they immediately despawn. If they despawn, whether it's from timing out due to their 20 seconds or from you leaving combat, they instantly cancel their cast. So you don't actually have to keep them hard CC'd the whole 20 seconds. You can hit them with one kick, follow up with a stun, then another CC or a kick, and, if they have 4 seconds left on their duration when they start their last cast, they'll just despawn and you don't have to bother with hitting that. I think that's fine. Their spawn rate is also really low. It seemed to be the lowest of the 3 affixes by far. I stood around for several minutes in combat with a mob that I had paralyzed, just kind of waiting on affixes to spawn, and they wouldn't pop up. So I think that they are relatively well tuned in terms of their impact, but the cast time could be longer, or they could spawn only one at a time every time. I think this affix is not bad. It's very impactful when it occurs, but it's pretty sporadic. Next is Afflicted. This affix behaves a little differently from Incorporeal. It spawns 1 or 2 friendly ghosts that last for 10 seconds, and you have to either dispel them or heal them to full in that 10-second window, or the group suffers a very large -haste debuff. It's basically like a negative bloodlust. They have a disease, a poison, and a curse on them when they spawn, and removing any of those 3 will make them despawn instantly. They have around 50,000 health and a +10. I'm thinking they'll probably have 150,000 health and a +25, so while dispelling them is easy, it's the preferred option, healing them up to full doesn't really seem like it'll be that difficult either. This affix spawns quite a bit more often than Incorporeal, so it is a bit more constant pressure, but it's also pretty well telegraphed, and they're up for 10 seconds at a time. Most of the dispels that you can use on them are 8-second cooldowns, so if you're paying attention and you get 2 of them at once rather than just a single spawn, there's a 2-second window in which one player could get both mobs on their own. Maybe the one at a time, the handful of times that I got only one, maybe those were a bug. Either way, I felt that this affix was pretty easy to deal with compared to Incorporeal. The failure condition isn't nearly as bad either. -haste is bad, especially when it's -50 or 60% haste or whatever, but being unable to heal and do damage at all is definitely worse. One final difference from Incorporeal is that if you end combat while the ghosts are out, they do not despawn. They still need to be healed or dispelled, or they will debuff you. And last up is Entangling. For Entangling, you will occasionally get slowed by a grasping vine for 8 seconds. If you move at least 10 yards, the vine breaks and you're set free. If you don't leave the circle around you in 8 seconds, the vine will stun you for 3 seconds. This is the easiest affix of the 3, at least on its own. It's probably, I think it might be the easiest affix in the game. Just like the other 2, it only affects you while you're in combat, and the main complaint that people had about it initially is that it was super hard to see when it triggered. I didn't really find that to be the case, but I get it. A lot of people are maybe spending more time looking at their bars. Certainly healers are looking at frames more, so yeah, okay. I think that's probably fixable with just a weak aura that makes it a squeaky whenever you get that debuff on you. That'll, I'm sure, be something that propagates out through the community over the first couple weeks of the season, but either way, it's pretty easy to just see now with a fully default UI. It's super obvious when it procs, and they also reduce the slow that the vine puts on you. It used to be 50%, now it's only 30%, so it's pretty easy to break free, even on classes that don't have good mobility. I could just walk out of the vine pretty much every time it spawned, no problem. There are 2 possible wrinkles here that I think could make this affix a lot more disruptive, and that would be interactions with stuff happening in the dungeon runs that you're doing. Either enemies that root you, and I had this going on in the clip that I'm going to be showing during this point. For classes that can't free themselves from a root, I don't know, a demon hunter or something, this could be bad. You could get rooted by an NPC as the vine is spawning and now you can't get out. I think this makes for the potential of difficult overlaps caused by a relatively easy affix and relatively minor enemy abilities coming together to stun you and kill you. I think that's something to be conscious of during entangling weeks. The other issue is in fights in which you want to keep a boss still. Maybe you're trying to point a boss away from the group for a tank frontal, or you're doing a fight that fills up a room with fire or some sort of poison on the ground or whatever, and you're trying to minimize your movement, trying to hold still. And then a vine spawns and you're forced to move. Again, I think this is kind of more interesting. I don't really see it as a design issue or a bad choice on Blizzard's part. I think it's a design success, actually. It's a fun problem that you have to solve on a case-by-case basis based on the dungeon you're doing, the class you're playing, the classes you're playing with. I think it all works together pretty well. And there is some good news, too. Slow immunities and removals, things like Blessing of Freedom, Tiger's Lust, Druid Shapeshifting, Master's Call from a Hunter, all of those instantly remove the Entangling Vine without having to leave the circle. Like Afflicted, leaving combat does not cause the root to despawn. In general, I found the spawn rate on these vines to be pretty low, and they were by far the least intrusive of the 3 new affixes. Again, probably the easiest affix in the game. Kind of a fan. Now let's talk about class balance, because these affix changes, I think, have a pretty profound impact on class balance. Incorporeal really favors classes who have lots of CC available, such as Monk, or the ability to spam out a single target CC, like a mage casting Polymorph. But mostly I think it favors the ability to put out a lot of interrupts, and that means it favors Protection Paladin. What a shock, something in the game that would make Protection Paladin stronger. New and different. Afflicted really favors classes that are able to help defensively dispel, and that mainly just means Monk and Pally again. All the classes that can be healers, so Monk, Pally, Druid, Priest, Evoker, and Shaman, they all have some way to pick up dispels in their class tree, even if they're in their DPS or their tank specs. Mages can also help with decursing, but a lot of the other classes can't do anything to help. Demon Hunters, Warlocks, regular Hunters, Rogues, they're all useless. And also, while Druids technically can get decurse and poison removal in their tree, the class tree for Druids still kind of sucks. It's very badly positioned. You have to spend 3 points to get that decurse, and you're actually pretty starved for points. So until Druid receives yet another class tree rework, Druids are kind of screwed. Balance will be totally fine, Resto will be completely fine, but Guardian and Feral Druids must suffer. It's tradition. Entangling is really easy to deal with as well. For Entangling weeks, having classes that can remove slows and snares with skills like Blessing of Freedom and Tiger's Lust is going to be huge. Prop Pally and Rep Pally both get a talent that lets them cast Blessing of Freedom on another player and still get a cast on themselves as well. It also gives a 30% move speed increase, which is just, nice. And that's going to be enormous on Entangling weeks. Again, wow, another buff to Prop Pally. That's crazy. I had thought about looking into some of the Affix combos that could potentially be kind of dangerous, but really to me, the only one that I'm actually seeing that I think has a lot of potential to be all that dangerous or frustrating or whatever is Entangling and Spiteful. Getting those Entangling Vine spawns right at the same time that you have a bunch of Spiteful Shades out could cause people to move a little bit slower than they expect, and you'll wind up getting one-banged by a Spiteful Shade. Now, Spiteful Shades have had their damage reduced by 10%. I don't think that's really that significant, but it's something. There's also the potential of Entangling and Sanguine. Again, you're trying to move through a Sanguine pool or out of one, and you get slowed a little bit, you take a little bit extra damage. I don't think that's a huge deal, and Sanguine has also been very slightly nerfed. It's gone from a 20-second duration on the puddles to a 12-second duration. It's good little quality of life. It still certainly is a situation where if you're letting a mob sit in a Sanguine puddle for any length of time, it's a bad thing, but it is a little bit less annoying of an affix now. I don't really think there are a lot of other affix combos that could be all that dangerous. The only other ones that I thought about maybe would be Incorporeal and Spiteful if you're blowing your crowd control to deal with the Incorporeals. Now you don't have it for Spiteful. I think that ultimately just means you kite. I don't really think it's that big of an impact. and then potentially Incorporeal and Sanguine. If you have pools right on top of where the Incorporeal ads are, you are going to need some sort of more ranged CC to deal with them. Again, pretty minor impact. Alright, I think all of these changes look really promising for Mythic Plus and Dragonflight Season 2. I usually don't love Mythic Plus, and the main reason for that has always been the affixes. Some of the time it's been the seasonal affixes. I think good ones can feel really nice, like the one in the last season of Battle for Azeroth, or the third season of Shadowlands. I think those were both pretty fun, but Thundering here in the first season of Dragonflight has been pretty frustrating most of the time, and I'm very excited that Blizzard has decided to just cut the seasonal affix entirely, roll in new affixes, and just let us play with that. It looks really good, and I'm very excited about it. Season 2 is going to be great. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.